Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a nation. Seemed stable, right? A party in power for ages, navigated crises, held on tight, then boom, almost overnight, everything flips. Streets explode, government falls, and, well, the people start rewriting the future. Passionately. That's the powerful, dramatic, deeply human story we're diving into today. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into Bangladesh's recent, truly transformative political upheaval, a series of events that just fundamentally reshaped the nation's landscape. It shows you the immense power of public outcry, and maybe surprisingly, how fragile entrenched power can actually be.
And to help us navigate this really complex, often quite harrowing story, we've gathered a pretty robust set of sources. When we're talking detailed reports, different angles, we've got foundational stuff from Wikipedia, sharp analysis from Honasoy.com, crucial reporting from Voice of America, The Guardian, Anagoloyansa, The Dhaka Tribune, also the Financial Times, Reuters, Al Jazeera, AP News, The Times of India, even some concise summaries from Profundo.app. So it's a real mix, giving us hopefully a multifaceted view.
Yeah, a lot to dig into. And our mission today, it's really to go way beyond just the headlines. We want to understand not just what happened, but why it mattered so much, connecting those dots, from what seemed like a specific student protest all the way to a dramatic nationwide movement ending in regime change. We'll pull out the key insights, the crucial bits of information, and guide you through this complex story with, hopefully, clarity and precision. Think of this as your shortcut to being really well informed on a critical geopolitical event. We'll uncover those surprising facts, the underlying dynamics that led to such a massive shift. The spark. A quota controversy ignites broader discontent. So let's start right at the beginning. The spark. The initial trigger that really set this whole chain reaction off, it was June 2024. The Supreme Court in Bangladesh makes this decision on the surface, maybe just like a policy tweak, but it ignited this absolute inferno of public outrage. What exactly was this job quota, and who was it meant to help?
Right. The immediate trigger, as you said, was the Supreme Court reinstating a 30% job quota. This was specifically for government service jobs, and it was designated for the direct descendants of the 1971 liberation fighters. Now, on paper, the idea was sort of conceived as a way to honor the legacy, the sacrifices of those who fought for Bangladesh's independence.
Okay, sounds reasonable enough on the surface, maybe?
Perhaps. But the reaction, especially among the student population, was immediate and furious. They absolutely did not see it as honoring legacy. They saw it as a direct, deeply unfair attack on, well, the basic principle of meritocracy.
Meritocracy. So the idea that jobs should go to the most qualified, regardless of family history.
Exactly. That was the core argument from the students. This 30% quota, they argued, fundamentally undermines fair competition, equal opportunity for everyone else. And you have to remember, Bangladesh has this huge youth population. Many are highly educated, got degrees, but they're really struggling to find decent jobs. The market's tough.
So this felt like another barrier being thrown up.
A massive barrier, almost insurmountable in their eyes. It wasn't just a small policy tweak. It felt like a structural unfairness baked into the system. Plus, there was this long-standing perception, that these kinds of quotas often ended up favoring supporters, loyalists of the ruling Awami League.
Ah, okay. So that adds a whole political dimension to it. It's not just about fairness in jobs. It's about political favoritism, too.
Precisely. It layered this deep political grievance onto what was already a simmering economic frustration. People felt the system was rigged for insiders. But, and this is crucial, this quota issue, it was the catalyst, yes, but it definitely wasn't the only reason things exploded. It was more like the match that lit this huge pre-existing bonfire of frustrations accumulated over years.
Right, that makes sense. It sounds like the ground was already incredibly fertile for discontent, just waiting for something, anything, to set it off. So beyond this specific quota, what were those broader systemic issues, the things that had been building up, creating this critical mass of dissatisfaction, basically priming the nation for this kind of explosion?
Absolutely. The quota system became this flashpoint because it tapped into such deep underlying problems, things that had been festering for years. One of the biggest, pervasive high youth unemployment. Like I said, huge youth demographic, millions entering the workforce, many well-educated, but just not enough opportunities. It breeds this deep sense of disillusionment. no future.
A generation feeling stuck.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And compounding that were serious, persistent economic problems. At the time, Bangladesh was grappling with really high inflation, around 9.7%, I think.
Wow, nearly 10%. That affects everyone, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's not just a statistic. For ordinary families, it's a daily struggle.
Yeah.
The price of basics, rice, cooking oil, fuel just skyrocketing, people's savings disappearing. Just putting food on the table became a huge burden. This economic squeeze, partly global pressures, but also perceived domestic mismanagement, it just fueled this widespread resentment. And maybe the most corrosive thing of all, this pervasive, deep-rooted concern about systemic corruption in government, in public life. Stories of graft, nepotism, people getting rich illicitly. It was common knowledge, or at least widely believed.
So that just eats away at public trust, doesn't it? The feeling that the system isn't just unfair, but actively corrupt.
Exactly. It erodes trust completely, deepens that perception that the system is rigged against the ordinary person.
So connecting those dots, it becomes crystal clear why this quota issue, even though it was about government jobs, became so explosively symbolic. It wasn't just about percentages on an application. It was like concrete proof of all those longstanding grievances, a symbol of a system people felt was deeply unjust.
Precisely. It became the focal point for a generation feeling like their future was being blocked by nepotism, unfair advantages, a total lack of meritocracy. It turned what could have been maybe a localized protest into the symptom of much deeper systemic problems. It really shows that boiling frog thing.
Yeah, the gradual buildup.
Right. All these grievances, unemployment, inflation, corruption, just simmering away, creating this pressure cooker. The job quota wasn't just a policy, it was the spark. The perfectly timed spark that ignited this national frustration that had been stewing for years. It showed how even a seemingly minor thing can undo entrenched power. When you have economic hardship plus perceived corruption plus no accountability, public trust just evaporates. People genuinely felt the system was rigged in this quota. It was like Exhibit A, irrefutable proof. 2, escalation and crackdown, the unfolding crisis.
Okay, so you have this deeply ingrained sense of a rigged system, massive frustration. It feels almost inevitable that the protests wouldn't stay peaceful for long. How quickly did things escalate beyond, organized marches? What kind of clashes started happening? Where did the violence begin?
It happened very quickly. What started as, relatively peaceful student rallies driven by that sense of injustice rapidly descended into intense, widespread confrontations. Protesters found themselves clashing directly with police, with other law enforcement, but also, and this is a really disturbing element, with members of the Chhatra League.
The student wing of the ruling Awami League, the one seen as loyalists.
Exactly. Known for their fervent loyalty and willingness to use aggressive tactics. And these weren't just isolated scuffles or shouting matches. The clashes became incredibly violent, spreading across multiple cities, multiple university campuses, very quickly.
And when you say violent, what are we talking about here? Tear gas, batons, or did it get worse than that? This is where things really took a dark turn, right?
It escalated dramatically and lethally. The sources detail widespread use of firearms. That's a terrifying leap from standard crowd control. Alongside the tear gas, rubber bullets, blunt weapons, sticks, rods. There were reports, credible reports, of live ammunition being used.
Live rounds against student protesters.
That's what the reports indicate. Imagine the chaos, the terror. Students initially protesting a job quota, suddenly facing gunfire, chemical irritants, severe beatings, and the implications of state-backed student wings like the Chhatra League getting involved in this violence. They're profound. It just completely blurs the lines.
Between government forces and, political thugs.
Essentially, yes. It turns these groups into extensions of state repression.
Yeah.
And that tactic, it just further alienated everyone, not just the protesters, the general public too. It deepened the outrage, fueled the fire, seeing partisan groups involved in violent suppression. It was a stark sign of the government's desperation, trying to cling to control at any cost. And as this violence escalated, the government's response became even more severe, moving from trying to contain local protests to massive nationwide suppression efforts.
That's a chilling progression. So protests intensifying, violence escalating. What were the most drastic measures the authorities took? How did they try to stamp this out? And what was the immediate impact on people's lives?
The response was swift, brutal, comprehensive. They slapped strict curfews on cities and regions, basically shutting down public life, forcing people indoors.
Yeah.
Even more alarming, the military was deployed, visibly, on the streets to enforce curfews, suppress protests
Military.
against their own citizens. Yes. And reports emerged, confirmed by multiple sources, of shoot-at-sight orders enforced on campuses, in city streets. This wasn't just a threat. It was a direct, lethal order. Engage anyone seen as protesting or even supporting the protests. It signaled this clear, uncompromising intent to use overwhelming, deadly force, put every protester's life on the line.
It's terrifying. And beyond the physical suppression, how did they try to control the information? In our digital age, how did they try to manage the narrative, stop people from knowing what was happening?
Information control was absolutely a key strategy. Nationwide internet shutdowns started around July 18th. And crucially, these weren't just one-offs. They continued intermittently right into August.
Cutting off internet access, social media too.
Completely blocking access to Facebook, WhatsApp, YouTube, platforms that are vital in modern protests for organizing, sharing real-time info, exposing abuses. The strategic thinking behind these blackouts is clear. Isolate the movement, stop coordination between groups, suppress the spread of dissent.
Does that even work anymore? Or does it just make people angrier?
Well, that's the thing. It often backfires spectacularly. It becomes this huge catalyst for even deeper anger. People feel silenced, cut off, actively deceived by their own government. That feeling of isolation, having your voice suppressed, it just fuels more defiance.
And the human cost and all this, the arrests, the deaths. What are the numbers we're looking at? It sounds devastating.
The human cost was immense, truly tragic, left deep scars. Over 11,000 arrests were recorded. That points to a massive, systematic dragnet, trying to cripple the movement by locking up participants, sympathizers.
11,000 arrests.
And when it comes to fatalities, there's this stark, deeply concerning discrepancy, which tells its own story. Official government counts put the deaths in the hundreds, trying to downplay it. But independent organizations, international bodies, especially the UN's Human Rights Office, the OHCHR, they painted a far grimmer picture. Widely accepted now. Their estimates were over 1,000, maybe even up to 1,400 killed. And critically, that horrific number included many, many students.
1,000 to 1,400 people killed, compared to the official hundreds. That gap is enormous.
It's huge. It highlights the severity of the crackdown and the potential for massive underreporting by the authorities. It suggests a deliberate attempt, really, to hide the true extent of the violence.
This level of suppression, especially when it gets that violent, that deadly, even if the goal is containment, it so often does the exact opposite, doesn't it? It must harden people's resolve.
Absolutely. When a government resorts to shoot-at-sight orders, mass arrests, internet blackouts, it often pushes people past a breaking point. It transforms a movement. What started with specific grievances, like job quotas, becomes this broader existential fight for basic rights, for dignity, for survival. The very attempt to violently crush the protests, paradoxically, radicalizes them, broadens their scope dramatically.
And is that what happened here? Did that extreme repression become the catalyst for something even bigger?
That's exactly what we saw in Bangladesh. The state's brutality, far from killing the dissent, ignited this deeper, more unified determination. It proved that extreme repression can indeed fuel an unstoppable uprising. 3. The turning point. From protests to uprising, the July massacre. Right. This intensified repression marked by the sheer scale of deadly violence, these chilling testimonies of gender-based threats, actual assaults, the deployment of heavy weapons by elite forces like the RAB and the police, it fundamentally changed everything. The nature of the protests, the demands. This wasn't just about job quotas anymore, not even close. The sheer brutality, especially those disturbing reports of gender-based violence, it pushed the movement far beyond its initial focus. It transformed into what people started calling the student people's uprising. It unified different parts of society under one single, powerful, unwavering goal: get Sheikh Hasina out, now.
So it shifted from a policy protest to a full-blown demand for regime change, driven by the violence itself.
Exactly. The violence, particularly the horrific reports about attacks on women,
Yeah.
added this profound moral outrage, this emotional intensity. It galvanized people. It became about survival, justice, the country's future, not just one policy. The brutality unified public opinion against the government in a way nothing else had. And this transformation, this shift from grievance to political demand, it set the stage for a truly dramatic and remarkably swift conclusion.
And what a dramatic conclusion it was. Walk us through those final days. The pressure was immense, obviously, but how did it actually unravel? What happened leading up to August 4th?
By August 4th, the sheer scale of public anger was just undeniable, overwhelming. Tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people converged on Shahid Minar.
That's a really symbolic place in Dhaka, right? Linked to national identity.
Deeply symbolic, representing struggle, self-determination. And this wasn't just students anymore. It was a colossal movement. People from all walks of life united in one demand. Sheikh Hasina must resign immediately. The pressure was immense, inescapable. Public support had just exploded.
And then came August 5th, the day it all broke. What happened? What was the pivotal moment that sealed her fate? Here's where it gets really compelling.
Indeed. August 5th was the day the dam broke. The pivotal moment, the one historians will focus on, was when the military made this crucial, game-changing decision. They refused orders to fire on the protesters.
The military refused orders.
Loudly refused.
Yeah.
That was the ultimate turning point. The moment the foundations of state power just fractured, crumbled, when the army, the regime's ultimate guarantor, refuses to suppress dissent. It signals the end. It's often irreversible. It showed the military chose maybe not to actively side with the people, but certainly not to fire on them.
So her authority just evaporated at that point.
Completely. She had no viable options left, no way to maintain control. She was compelled to flee the capital by helicopter, bringing her government's long, powerful tenure to this abrupt, definitive end. That image, the prime minister fleeing by helicopter, it's such a potent symbol. The rapid, almost instant collapse of a power structure that seemed unshakable just days before. That shows what happens when the security forces shift their loyalty or just withhold it. 4. Aftermath and new political landscape.
So Hasina flees, the regime collapses. What happens then in the immediate aftermath once the dust starts to settle? How did that student movement, the spark that started it all, continue to evolve in this completely new reality?
Well, after Hasina's exile to India, the immediate focus was trying to restore some kind of normalcy, starting with education. Universities, which had been the heart of the protest, they gradually reopened around September 2024. But the students, having achieved this monumental change, they weren't just going back to class like nothing happened. They saw this huge political vacuum, this unprecedented chance to shape the future.
They weren't done yet.
Not at all. Instead of dispersing, they started organizing with remarkable speed, purpose, laying the groundwork to form a proper, formal political platform.
And new leaders must have emerged from all this. People who stepped up during the protests. Who were some of the key figures and what were they aiming for long term?
Absolutely. Several key protest leaders really rose to national prominence, became symbols of the uprising. Names like Nahid Islam, Asif Mahmoud, Abu Bakr Majumdar became widely known. Nahid Islam, particularly, took a very visible leading role in forming the National Citizen Party, the NCP.
A new political party born directly out of the protests.
Exactly. And their goal is incredibly ambitious, potentially transformative. They want to fundamentally break the political duopoly that's dominated Bangladesh for decades. You know, the Awami League versus the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP, back and forth.
So not just swapping one old party for another, but creating a genuine third force.
That's the aim. And their vision goes beyond just changing who's in charge. They're calling for a fundamental constitutional overhaul, a complete reset of the country's governance, aiming for a truly democratic, meritocratic system. It signals this potential massive shift in the political landscape, a fresh, dynamic, youth-led force aiming for systemic change, not just swapping leaders. A new perspective, free from the old baggage. It's a real challenge to the old guard.
But the fallout wasn't just about new politics emerging, there had to be a reckoning with the past, right? Accountability for what happened during the crackdown. What about Hasina herself? Any legal repercussions?
Well, yes. In mid-2025, a huge development. Sheikh Hasina was formally indicted on very serious charges, crimes against humanity.
Crimes against humanity, that's major.
Absolutely. Directly related to the protest killings, particularly during that July massacre period. And crucially, the accusations cite leaked audio recordings, allegedly containing her direct shoot-to-kill orders.
Leaked audio, that's potentially damning evidence.
Hugely significant, both for domestic accountability in Bangladesh and for international human rights law. It sends this powerful message. Even former heads of state can, and potentially will, be held responsible for atrocities committed under their command. Sets a major precedent.
And beyond Hasina, what about the wider network, the loyalists, the structures that supported the old regime? Did the interim government go after them?
Yes, they moved quickly to consolidate power and deal with the remnants of the old regime. In February 2025, they launched this big initiative called Operation Devil Hunt.
Operation Devil Hunt. Sounds dramatic.
It was a deliberate, systematic crackdown targeting key Awami League loyalists. Across different sectors, bureaucrats, powerful business figures with government ties, local party strongmen. Not just low-level guys. Over 11,000 arrests were made during this operation. It showed a clear effort to dismantle those patronage networks, the power bases that sustained the previous regime. Often framed as anti-corruption or accountability for violence, but highlights the complexities, the often immediate, sometimes retributive actions that follow regime change. Dealing with the old establishment is never simple. V human rights and gendered violence. A deeper look.
Let's shift focus now to something absolutely crucial and often deeply disturbing in these situations: human rights. How did the international community, especially the UN, respond to the horrific violence we've been talking about?
The international community definitely took serious notice. The UN's Human Rights Office, OHCHR, issued this stark report, confirming, as we mentioned, over 1,400 deaths during the crackdown. But they didn't just report numbers. They issued a very strong demand for thorough, independent, impartial investigations into all the human rights violations. Excessive force, the killings, other abuses.
What's the real significance of the UN getting involved like that, demanding investigations, especially now with these charges against Hasina?
It's hugely significant. It signals profound international concern. It puts sustained pressure on any new government to ensure real accountability, to prevent these acts from just being swept under the rug. This kind of international scrutiny creates potential for long-term pressure for justice, making sure victims aren't forgotten and those responsible are held to account under both domestic and international law. It underlines that global expectation. Nations have to uphold basic human rights standards, especially during internal strife.
Now, there's a specific aspect of this violence that needs highlighting, even though it's incredibly difficult to talk about. The reports of abuse against women protesters. What specifically happened, and what does it reveal?
This is a truly horrific dimension. Leaked testimonies, later corroborated by a UN probe, detailed credible reports of widespread rape threats and actual sexual assaults used against women protesters, reportedly perpetrated by security forces, or just as disturbingly by allied groups like the Chhatra League. It's a chilling reminder of how violence gets weaponized, not just to subdue, but to terrorize and dehumanize.
Why is it so important to single out this gender-based violence instead of just lumping it in with the general violence statistics?
It's absolutely crucial because, tragically, gender-based violence is often used systematically, deliberately, as a tool of repression. In protests, conflicts worldwide, it's not random, it's a calculated tactic. Target a vulnerable group to demoralize, to shame, to intimidate everyone else from participating. Attacking women sends this terrifying message to the whole community, tries to deter anyone from joining or supporting protests. The psychological impact goes way beyond the immediate victims, creates this atmosphere of fear designed to crush dissent. It underscores the brutal, dehumanizing, strategically insidious nature of the response. It wasn't just physical suppression, it was psychological warfare, terror. Recognizing this specific aspect is vital to understanding the full human cost, the true nature of the violence employed. 6 wider implications. beyond Bangladesh.
All right, let's zoom out a bit. Look at the bigger picture. Beyond the immediate aftermath, the specific atrocities, how has this whole upheaval really impacted the political landscape of Bangladesh long term? What kind of shifts might we see?
Well, it's caused a profound, probably irreparable disruption to the Awami League's long dominance. For years, they were the political force, almost unchallengeable. This movement has fundamentally weakened their power base. We're seeing ongoing investigations, arrests of loyalists that could erode their influence further. There's also potential for the BNP, the traditional opposition, to return to a more central role. But critically, we're seeing the strong emergence of these new student-based parties, like the NCP, offering a genuinely fresh alternative.
So the old two-party system might actually break.
That's the big question. The long-term possibilities are significant. It could lead to a much more diverse, competitive political field, maybe more volatile too. Breaking that entrenched cycle could be destabilizing initially, as new groups vie for power. The role of Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus's interim government here is absolutely critical. They have this incredibly delicate balancing act. Stabilize the country, ensure some accountability, and set the stage for a new political era, all while managing competing demands from powerful groups and a newly energized population. And these events, they resonate far beyond Bangladesh. They serve as this powerful case study for global discussions about governance, state violence, accountability.
Exactly. What are those broader lessons for the rule of law, for democratic processes? Especially with all the international attention this got, how might it influence things globally?
Well, the intense international scrutiny BBC reporting on shoot orders, the tribunal indictments against figures like Hasina that serves as a real catalyst for political accountability worldwide. This kind of attention can significantly influence domestic legal processes, push them towards transparency, justice, maybe set precedents for holding leaders accountable during unrest. It reinforces that idea. Nations are subject to universal human rights standards. The world is watching. And looking forward, Yunus's interim government, they've laid out this very ambitious vision, not just managing the crisis. They explicitly want to fundamentally reform the entire political system.
How so? What are they planning?
They're talking about pushing national elections beyond 2026 to give time for a proper overhaul of institutions and, crucially, revising the Constitution itself. This shows this conscious effort towards a real democratic reset, moving beyond crisis management to fundamental systemic change, redefining the nation's political identity. It raises big questions, though, about transitional governments. Can they actually pull off such deep reforms?
It really brings it home that this isn't just one country's story. It's this powerful case study, isn't it? How collective action met with brutal repression can fuel this fierce demand for accountability that just dramatically alters a nation's path. We've covered an incredible amount today, from that specific student protest over job quotas all the way to Bangladesh's most transformative political upheaval in decades, ending in complete regime change.
Yeah, these events really highlight this profound, almost primal demand from young people for meritocracy, accountability, real democratic reform. And what we saw was that demand being met with violent, often brutal repression, which paradoxically just fueled the movement, transformed it into this unified uprising that led to regime change, and this profound remaking of the political landscape, a stark reminder of the power of a unified population when pushed too far.
So, as you think about all this, what does it mean? Consider how such rapid, dramatic political shifts, sparked by what seemed like one policy decision, really speak to those huge accumulated pressures simmering beneath the surface in a society. What does Bangladesh's recent history tell us about the incredible resilience of its people facing such adversity, but also maybe about the inherent fragility of even long-standing power structures when faced with unified discontent, and that critical moment when the military refuses to back the regime? Something to really mull over. We hope this deep dive has given you a clearer picture, maybe sparked your own curiosity to dig deeper. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.